And welcome everyone to the Shitlord Preachers podcast. This is episode 31, presented by Think Liberty. Thanks everyone for joining us today. My name is Amos Joseph. I'm joined today by my co-host Brook Potter and our special guest today. Now, Eric, how do you pronounce your last name again?
It's Laprise.
Laprise, Erick
Yep.
Laprise. So, for those of you who are joining us for the first time, Shitlord Preachers is basically a podcast where my friend Brooke and myself, who used to be preachers, now we're formed shitlords, basically come together and we have our conversations with guests as well as just with each other on basically just how we've started to see politics. Very similar to religion, has a lot of the same mindsets, thought processes, and we thought, hey, since we're having all these conversations before, let's just put it into a podcast. And here we are at episode 31. How's it going today, Brooke?
It's cold. Not Minnesota cold, but it's definitely getting there for a man who's originally from the Caribbean. So for those who don't know, I'm originally from Trinidad and Tobago, and I recently moved out to the UK. I keep saying recently; it's been 2 years now. I mean, it's getting cold and wet, which is typical London weather, and it's really getting to me. But yeah, man, I'm always excited. 31 episodes. It's been pretty wild that we've actually kept this thing going this long.
Yeah, and then now we're even this will hopefully be one of our first episodes that we're going to be adding on to Being Libertarian, which is now the new organization that we've sort of merged into becoming. Think Liberty, Rational Standard, now joining up with Being Libertarian, which is pretty exciting. But yeah, just as Brooke said, he's over there in London, which is why we do it so early in the day for us Americans, and myself here in Minnesota. Warming up a bit today, actually, into the 20s and 30s. So a little bit of a dusting of snow on the ground. But today we're joined by Erick Laprise, a full blown Black Flag anarchist. Brooke and myself kind of identify sort of like as more ANCAP, touching on some minarchist sort of beliefs. But it's interesting that we have a full blown Black Flag, not like an ANCOM or an ANCAP. However, we would love to talk to any ANCOMs in the future. If anyone is willing to come onto the show, to have an awesome discussion, we'd love that. But full blown Black Flag, which I've never seen too many of. But Eric, introduce yourself real quick before we get into it.
Yeah, absolutely. To start with, there's not a lot of us. Black Flag anarchists. We're a rare breed. My name's Erick Laprise. I'm 31 years old. Kind of third generation dissident, which is kind of how you get to being a full blown Black Flag anarchist. Is you start with parents and grandparents that don't like the government much, and yeah, that's kind of it. Pretty straightforward.
When you say third generation dissident, can
Yeah,
tell me
so
what was your dad and grandfather?
well, it's not my. It's actually my maternal. It's my
maternal.
grandmother on my mom's side and my mom. So my
Wow,
grandmother was a kind of radical Christian, back to the earth type in the late 60s and early 70s. Kind of checked out because of the hippie movement. Didn't like the whole free drugs and sex and yada yada that came with the hippie stuff. Because as you might imagine, radical Christian, like Assembly of God, no TV, no processed foods, living on a farm in Central Oregon, like it
hardcore.
really, yeah, hardcore. Not politically. Politically, she's kind of a kind of call her a like Pat Buchanan, paleo con, pretty solid Bible belter at this point. Just a lot of it was just not having the discourse of anarchy. It wasn't a thing that you found. The anarchists that you would have found in the late 60s and early 70s were, the ANCOM types, the black and red and, bomb throwing, Weather Underground and SDS. And nobody wants any of that. So,
Right.
Especially the radical Christian crowd, they didn't want pacifism doesn't exactly bode well with bombings. And then my mom, went to school to be a teacher. She was an education major in college and decided she didn't want those people teaching her kids. So she took her mom's kind of back to the earth, homesteading kind of mentality and applied homeschooling to that. So I never went to public school or private school a day in my life until I went to college. And so that's the second generation. And then you take the third generation and you find somebody who grew up like raising chickens, and even in like when we lived in suburbia, like we had chickens and ducks and rabbits and all kinds of weird stuff. And then add the homeschooling and critical thinking kind of component to that, and then send that person to college, and they find kind of the discourse of libertarianism kind of through Ron Paul. And then because of the critical thinking stuff, you keep digging and keep digging and keep digging. And eventually you get to, oh, hey, this discourse on anarchism is really fascinating. It's a total freedom for everybody, period, end of discussion. Sounds pretty good to me. So that's how you get to third generation kind of radical dissident. So
that's awesome. So what was your political affiliation before your aha moment?
So my dad was a Reagan Republican and huge Rush Limbaugh fan. So I grew up on Rush Limbaugh on talk radio. So as you might imagine, my politics at kind of 18, 19, 20, 21 were not great. They were neocon in practicality without understanding what that actually meant. And it led to things like joining the military as a third generation radical dissident. Makes no sense whatsoever, but it kind of happened. So that's where I was. And then I got wildly disillusioned with the military while serving, as you might imagine. And I got out in 2007. And just as the 2008 presidential campaign was really heating up and Ron Paul was running, and that was super interesting. And I was really interested in Ron Paul, and I watched one of the debates with my dad, and he was like, yeah, he's really good on this, that, and the other thing, but he's really terrible on Israel and Iran and foreign policy. And I kind of let it go at that. And then the 2012 campaign rolled around. I took another look at it. My dad and I kind of weren't speaking at the time. And realized, oh yeah, this is really solid, and the foreign policy stuff might still be a little squirrely, but it's better than what anybody else is saying. So then you read more, and I was driving a cab and then Uber, and so you got a lot of free time on your hands, and Bluetooth headphones are awesome. And so you find podcasting and audiobooks and wander down a ridiculous rabbit hole, and it gets pretty easy to self-radicalize when you've got nothing to do but listen to podcasts 12 hours a day.
Self-radicalize, that's
yeah, it's not like I got recruited into anarchism, right? Like you said, there's not a whole lot of us, so getting recruited is kind of a problem. You get to that place on your own.
Yeah. Now, so we many people kind of understand like the basic definition of anarchism, but I guess how do you define full-blown just black flag anarchism? That's specific, I guess.
So I would say there's a couple of things. So there's kind of three parts to anarchism as far as I'm concerned. The first one is decentralization. We talked a little bit before this started about community councils and things of that nature. And it's like, yeah, the closer to the people that are involved in that, the better. Down to none at all, if that's what you want. And then agorism, which is kind of an economic system that isn't. It's also known as counter-economics. We can talk about that a little bit more in a little bit. And then there's kind of legal theory and philosophy of anarchism and how you get there kind of through property rights and out kind of the back end of kind of ANCAP perspective of how things are supposed to go and how you kind of get past ANCAP to just anarchy. And that's kind of the three pieces for me.
So is it that you're advocating for private law?
I'm advocating for, it would be private law as some of the, I'm trying to think of who's really good on that. I know Hop has written a little bit on private law. Rothbard was great on that.
Rothbard, yeah.
I would consider myself mostly a Rothbardian if you had to peg me to somebody, although Spooner's got a pretty decent influence. The ANCAPs are mostly right. right? The Austrians are especially right on economics. They're correct in their critique on that thing. The piece that they tend to miss, the piece that I have a criticism of, is the kind of what Robert Higgs calls participatory fascism of the modern American empire, and that they miss the critique of major corporate power. The ANCAPs don't have that critique because they see it all as free market, and they don't have a really good critique of rent seeking and the things that go along with that. And that's where I kind of depart from the ANCAPs rather dramatically.
So you're not in favor of big business and these types of things?
It's not that I'm not in favor of big business. If you can build a large enough business without state support, more power to you. But at some level of scale, having been a business owner and working for myself, at some level of scale, you're so, especially because of the scale of the American state at this point, and the European states, almost worse, you can't help it. It's the nature of the thing is that you are integrated with the state. They've made it so complicated to not be involved that you almost can't do it, especially at scale. And so while I don't necessarily have the ANCOM view of like, yeah, rent seekers are evil and yada, yada, and we should, raid their houses and steal their wealth and lynch them French Revolution style. I don't think that. I do think that there's a critique there of the use of state power for corporate gains and being a happy, willing participant in that versus a reluctant participant in that to the betterment of humanity. And I think the ANCAPs miss that critique.
Oh, so ANCAPs you feel they don't quite address the issues of basically capitalism gone wild with corporatism.
Right. I know they're against it, but their critique is the state, not the corporatism. And I think they go together. You can't have one without the other. You need both. And if you can't critique both, then you miss the point.
Right.
Whereas the ANCOMs have the reverse problem, right? They don't believe in property rights. That's, to my perspective, like I would rather live in an ANCAP world because no property rights equals like total de-evolution to barbarism and starvation. Like I don't want to go there either. The ANCAPs are mostly correct. I would rather live in their world. I just think they don't go far enough.
Right. Okay. So rent is not theft.
Paying rent to your landlord is not theft. Having been a landlord, I own my house. You pay me rent. It's not theft. Rent seeking, as in rent seeking from the government, that's a different. Those things get intertwined. Like the ANCOMs get that wrong. They go, "Oh, all rent is theft," right? Rent is not theft. Rent seeking, participating in the government as a business model is a problem.
Okay.
Being a landlord and owning your property and renting your property out to other people, and it doesn't necessarily have to be real property. It can be like renting tools out and things of that nature. That's not theft per se.
Okay.
So, like, Amos, we had a conversation the other day about windmills, and they piss you off because your tax money is getting flushed down the toilet, right?
Exactly. Like we talked.
The people that run those are rent seekers.
Right. Yeah. Real quick for everyone. Yeah, I just had this conversation with, and definitely people could, contribute to this discussion too. What status symbols do you find the most triggering or upsetting? And my thing was those wind generators because of how much money is dumped into them to maintain for such I perceive as just a very more of a virtue signaling sort of thing rather than an actual practical application of green energy. Brooke and I have talked about this too. Like solar energy seems to be the best, and why not just go nuclear? If it's already safe enough. But yeah, people talked about because I was thinking of like the IRS building or like certain like big statues of certain Americans that people honor and stuff, but I was like windmills, and everyone's like, "What?" I mean, I'd like.
You're not wrong. It's not something somebody would think about normally, but yeah. I mean, it is rent seeking in the way the ANCOMs mean it. That is rent seeking. That is going to the government to get them to pay for your project through money you didn't earn correctly. So if you wanted, like, if you're T. Boone Pickens, who's really invested in windmills in Texas, who is a multi-billionaire from oil money, if you want to take your billions of dollars and go build your windmills on your private property, more power to you. Have fun with that. If you, as a business model, go to the government with your hands out and say, "Hey, would you like tax-funded grants and loans and like the Solyndra nonsense. That's all massive problems. And I know the ANCAPs aren't for that stuff, but they don't critique it actively. And that's my kind of issue. They critique it when it's when it becomes an obvious problem, right? But there's a ton of ANCAPs that really like Elon Musk, and he's doing the same things, but because he's relatively successful at it, they don't have a critique of him, right?
Yeah, I mean, you hear about all this, like, oh, he's like, Tony Stark and all this stuff. And it's like, but if you look at Tony Stark and you look at Elon Musk, how many government contracts do they have?
All of them. All of the government contracts for everybody. I mean, that's the reality is like, okay, so the gigawatt factory is really cool and all, but where's that lithium coming from? Oh, well, a lot of it's coming from Afghanistan, I guess, and places where like the American military is there propping up American industry so we can get mineral resources out of places that didn't want to sell them to us. So yeah, it's the worst kind of corporatism imaginable. And there's a ton of ANCAPs out there that look at Elon Musk and go, oh my God, he's so cool. And granted, he seems like a cool dude. And he's doing all these things within the system as it exists. So I kind of get it. But it's a problem. He's receiving stolen goods. That is a crime if you and I do that.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And he's doing it on a scale that is unimaginable to most people and is zero critique from anybody but the ANCOMs.
Which
yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I've been a big critic of Elon Musk. I mean, as I say, he's probably a really nice guy, but I don't think he necessarily deserves a lot of the esteem that he's getting, because some of this stuff is not really his. Like everybody thinks he founded Tesla, for instance. No, he didn't. He actually booted the founders out, and he took it over. And the company, I think they just posted a profit, but I mean, it looks like they might have fiddled the numbers. And then, of course, it's SpaceX, right? So SpaceX is pure government funding. It's just, handout. Now, I know that's a soft spot for Amos because he's all, Star Trek. Let's get to
me too. I grew up on Star Wars and Star Trek. I love it. That's great. It's the worst kind of corporatism. Yeah, it sucks. Yeah. It sucks. It hurts me inside to go, yeah, I want to go to the stars too, but we can't find a way to do it privately. So all it does is take stolen money and throws it down the drain because we're not getting anywhere. That's painful. I get it.
Because I now I have to like kind of I can't help myself now. I talk to people and I got to tell them, they're like, oh, because I'll come across other people that are like, we want to go to the stars, and I'm like, do you know why we went to the moon? And they're like, what? And I'm like, the Russians. I said, and then you hear, Neil deGrasse Tyson talk about if we want to go on Mars, someone needs to falsify a Chinese memo that they want to build a base on Mars in the next couple decades, and we'll get there. And it just goes to show, it's Anyways.
So do you have a plan on how to privatize the space race then? No?
I mean, the reality is, stop funding it with the government. Somebody's going to do it. Some crazy multi-billionaire like Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk, they'll figure out another way. The reason they're doing the corporatism route, the government handout route, is because that's what's available.
It's free money for them.
It's not even free money. It's the government is doing these things already. We can do them more efficiently at a profit, and we can take that profit for research and development and get down the road because we want to get off the planet. So great. And I have less of a critique of that kind of corporatism, right? Because it's less stick it to the other guy and more, hey, we can do this more efficiently. We can actually save the taxpayers. We can save them money. We can do it more efficiently. We can do it at a profit. And using that technology, we can advance the human race. I don't like it, but I see where they're coming from. Right? That's a completely different thing than to say, hey, we're going to use this corporatism like Lockheed and Boeing and build bombs and go blow up buses of school children in Yemen for no good reason. That's way worse, obviously. And the ANCAPs are good on that critique because they're mostly anti-war. But they miss the corporatism part of that. They say anti-war is like, the war is bad. Great, I'm with you. Part of the critique of the war is bad is also the military-industrial complex is bad, and that's where a lot of the motivation for these endless wars overseas come from. And you got to have both. You got to critique both parts. You can't say, oh yeah, Lockheed and Boeing for the non-military applications that they do is great, even though a huge part of that is taxpayer subsidized also. And they're making the bombs and the planes and the weapons systems that go overseas and kill brown people for no reason. You can't support both. You can't have one without the other. They go hand in hand. So if you're anti-war, you should also be anti-military industrial complex. And that's, I think, the ANCAPs get the anti-war part right and miss a lot of them. Not all of them. There's plenty of them that are very good on, the military industrial complex is awful. But you miss that critique publicly most of the time because they get so bogged down in the other side of the argument.
Yeah.
Now, I know I asked you, you kind of like, because, you're full black flag, but then you talked about agorism. Yep. What is agorism? I'm still trying to figure that out because I get like a bunch of different answers.
So agorism is basically the economic model for full anarchy. It's real free markets. It's regardless of what that looks like. So, going back to the ANCAPs, Mises was right? All economics is human action, and value is relative. So agorism says, yeah, that's great. So live that out. Don't interact with the state if you can avoid it. Build your own markets. Black markets are fine. And then trade however you want to. So if you want to have your little socialist commune locally and that's how you do things, that's great, as long as you don't force anybody to participate. If you want to have your mega corporation and you can do it without the state, that's fine too, as long as you don't force anybody to do anything and you respect everybody's property rights appropriately. And so that's the major difference between, say, like the ANCAPs are like, oh, we're capitalists and we want an anarcho-capitalist utopia. Right, that's the accusation they get. And I know, generally speaking, what they mean by capitalism is free market, non-state intervention capitalism. What they miss is the inherent force involved in saying everybody has to be a capitalist. And so agorism says, no, you just do whatever you want to do, and as long as you don't force anybody to do it, however you want to trade between individuals is fine. That includes socialism or communism. If you want to justly acquire a piece of property, I don't really buy into homesteading, but let's pretend that we're going to talk about Lockean homesteading, and you're going to go find a vacant piece of property and you're going to homestead it and justly acquire it as a group, and you want to live as a commune on that group, no problem. As long as you don't go super culty and nobody can leave, as long as everybody's there voluntarily and can leave when they want to, more power to you. ANCAPism doesn't really allow for that very well. I think most ANCAPs in practice would allow for that, but their discourse doesn't talk about that directly. Agorism says, free markets, period, end of discussion.
Because I know you kind of, a couple people kind of just basically point out that agorism is sort of, like you were stating at one point, the practical plan to achieve anarchy.
Yeah, that's another piece of it. So we talked a little bit about kind of the three parts of anarchy that I see. I see kind of practical anarchy, kind of philosophical anarchy, and then kind of holding the Overton window, right? I've kind of got three pieces to that. The practical anarchy part is where agorism comes in. So I don't think anarchy as a legal system, as a world order, is practically achievable in my lifetime without a massive amount of pain for a lot of people. What I do think is I can work myself towards anarchism in my own life by choosing to do business with people that don't participate in state violence, that doing things that don't incur taxation, things of that nature. So, for example, buying from your local farmer in cash technically generates a tax occurrence, but much like cash tipping, the reporting on that's not great. How are they going to prove you did or didn't do something, right? And so I'm not telling anybody not to pay taxes. I'm saying, here's the cash, do what you want with it. We got to trade. Or I went and traded with you. Technically, I'm supposed to value that trade appropriately and claim it on my taxes. But, how do you report that? How do you prove I did or didn't do something? that's a way to move towards anarchism in your own day-to-day life from a practical standpoint, right? Philosophical anarchism, freedom for everybody, is a thing that is, I don't necessarily think is achievable in my lifetime, and I definitely don't think it's achievable under our existing kind of geopolitical structure, if that makes sense.
Right.
So that's the third piece. The third piece is holding the Overton window going, hey, I'm going to sit over here and plant my black flag in the ground and not budge. And hopefully I can help drag everybody else my direction. And if we end up with some sort of night watchman minarchist state or some sort of non-interventionist, much smaller federal government and real kind of federalism as a result, I'll be happier with that world than I am with the world that we're in now. So that's the third piece. So there's philosophical anarchism of like, I would love to see generations from now a world that could accept real anarchism on a global scale for everybody. I don't think that's practical in the moment. Practical anarchism and agorism says, I'm going to do what I can in my own life to avoid the state and participate in free markets and develop my own systems of support. The Overton window holding piece of it says, if more of us can sit over here on the far edges and go, hey, everything you guys do sucks, you need to come over here, it's much better, and we can drag that Overton window over, hopefully we can eventually, hopefully in my lifetime, move the state smaller, less interventionist, less war, less grief for everybody, less taxes, more freedom. So those are kind of the three pieces of my kind of anarchy philosophy and how I see that.
So if I said pragmatic anarchist, would that make it? Would that?
So I have some friends. My dad is a pragmatic. He considers himself kind of a pragmatist, and more of an ANCAP than I am at this point. And so, yes, there's some level of pragmatism, right? Like I'm not a sovereign citizen nut job, right? I'm not going to put my like cardboard, free to travel, not license plate on my car, and not carry an ID, and then get arrested and do the Irwin Schiff thing of tax protesting and spending the better part of my life in jail and then dying in prison. I'm not going to do that. I like my family. I like my kid. I want to be around for her life. I'm not going to accidentally wind myself up in jail because I decided to kick the hornet's nest. What I am going to do is consciously and responsibly remove myself from the system wherever I can.
Right.
So yeah, it ends up being somewhat pragmatic.
Because I've talked to, I mean, you hear about. I've talked to some, anarchists, ANCAPs and such, and they'll kind of just. I think we talked about being a collapsitarian, and they're just like anarchy like today or tomorrow, and it's just like
right. So I also identify as a collapsitarian, but I'm a little bit different. So like you might follow like the Free Rifleman on Twitter or ZeroGov. Bill and Skip are like, if they could push the button to collapse the government tomorrow, they would totally do it. I can't quite bring myself to do that because a lot of people are going to die.
Exactly. I mean,
and so what I think the reason I'm mostly a collapsitarian is I think it's going to happen anyway. Like I think the debt and the military interventionism and the size and scale of the empire, that's how empires fall. They collapse. It's not a smooth decline. It's generally speaking ugly. The only place that ever went kind of smoothly was in Britain, and they suffered a bunch of military defeats on the way down, and then their financial power base had a nice easy landing spot in America. Well, the American financial power base doesn't exactly that nice soft easy landing doesn't exist right now. China's not there because they're not going to play ball with the corporatists exactly. I mean, they play a little bit of ball, but they're China first. Russia doesn't have it. They've obviously they're one of 3 countries in the world that don't have a central bank that plays nice with everybody else. So that doesn't work. So I don't know where they go. Right. And so I don't see a soft landing for the American empire in our future. And so my collapsitarianism is, hey, you should probably kind of think about this and keep your eyeballs open and kind of be somewhat prepared as best as you can for some sort of nastiness down the road. But it's not, hey, push that button tomorrow, let's get this show on the road. I might joke about it that way on Twitter because I've been thinking about this for 10 years and I'm happy to play that game because I'm ready for it. But I don't want to cause misery directly, if that makes sense.
So you don't want to push the Rothbard button, but you
No.
think the Rothbard bomb is just going to detonate itself eventually.
You know, I think so. The Rothbard button and the like, no government anywhere all at once, push the button. I don't actually think that's going to happen. What I think is going to happen is the American empire is going to collapse. Now, what's left in that vacuum is not going to be philosophical anarchism, right? It's Somalia. It's yeah. Oh, move to Somalia. Well, yeah, Somalia is not anarchism. Somalia is a collapsed state. It's a failed state. Those are not the same thing. And so if you get a failed state, one of the things you get is you get an immediate loss of the systems of support that most people rely on daily. Anarchy says we need to build our own systems of support locally and then as a distributed network of people who voluntarily agree on things. That's not what we have now. So if we go from massive state and state intervention and state systems of support to no state, the systems of support are going to break down and a lot of people are going to get hurt because there's not, in the like, if you had said in 1890, hey, we're going to just remove the government, I'd have said probably, because you still had mutual aid societies and you still had a huge amount of federalism and you still had a huge amount of local government that really meant something. And the people in 1890, especially in America, would have been much more ready to accept something like, oh yeah, the federal government is gone and the state government's gone and all you've got left is the local government because you know that guy, like you go to church with that guy and it's easier to manage. And so that's different than, hey, we've had 100 years of somewhere between socialism and, a nice, soft, fluffy, participatory fascism. And a huge portion of the population is like wildly dependent on the government. And then another big portion of the population is mostly dependent on government services like water and power and roads and whatever. So that if you just collapse everything now, you'd get total chaos and failed stateism. Like, I mean, Skip thinks the way things are going to go down is like the Balkans in the 90s. That's really ugly. It's super ugly. So no, I don't want that. Do I think that's going to happen? I think it's maybe. There's a reasonable chance. I thought it was going to happen, 10 years ago, and it didn't. So I could be wrong, and I'm willing to be wrong and still be ready for it to happen. In fact, I kind of hope I'm wrong because, like I said, the Balkans in the 90s were really ugly. Go read some history. It's real nasty.
So I mean, just some practical stuff then. So where do you stand on like sovereign borders and stuff like that? Like,
I think they're a fiction.
You think they're a fiction?
Yeah, I think so. I think the state, capital S, religious state, is illegitimate, and I think it's a fiction used by the ruling class to control the masses. I don't think it's obviously in a practical sense it's real, right? In a tangible sense it exists. It runs our life. But I think from a real perspective, like you get this argument all the time with police and like, oh, they put on a costume and it gives them special privileges. Right. Bullshit. Excuse my language. That doesn't work. Yeah, right. Just because you put on a costume doesn't give you special rights that nobody else has. I can't assault you. You can't assault me. We can't then together give somebody else the right to assault somebody else. That doesn't work. Sure. And so the same thing applies to borders. So that's where I come down. Is they're fictional.
Okay. So in your future anarchist state, there are no borders.
There's property rights.
Yeah.
Right. So if you're as a town, as a property owners organization, want to say, hey, only certain people can live here, or you have to like meet these criteria to buy property here, or whatever that looks like, that's fine. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's it. It's pretty simple. Like, restrictive covenants and deeds and those things, very, very practical, very easy to enforce, not a big deal. Borders as a state concept where we're just going to arbitrarily draw lines to say this is this state and this is this state. It didn't exist until the Peace of Westphalia, basically.
Right. But I mean, there are a lot of people out there who probably don't have the best intentions for the U.S. as it is now. I mean, if the
So
borders were to disappear,
that's a different story. That's
sure.
That's back to
I
the
know
Rothbard
that's where I
button,
was
right?
leading up to.
So that goes back to like, hey, would I make borders go away tomorrow?
Right, right.
So
China would love that.
China would like that. Russia would probably
Russia
like
would
that.
that.
Mexico would probably like that. Yeah, Mexico would really like that. So yeah, I get the argument. There's a couple of pieces to that argument. The first one is the welfare state, and the second one is resources and so on.
And democracy.
And what?
Well, this was a point I was making with Amos. If you import people with a different ideology, so if I will say the incoming population is not freedom minded, they're going to reinstate some kind of state or some kind of government. So this is why, yeah, I'm pro border in that sense, is because you keep like-minded people together in order to keep the ideology of freedom. If you just do away with that and China comes in, you get communism. You understand my principle?
Yeah. Like I said, it's the Rothbard button argument. It's
yeah. Completely agree.
Immediately obliterated today? Probably not.
So much.
It's lots of consequences, lots of unforeseen consequences, kind of a problem. Philosophically, yeah, open borders. But part of that conversation, like with free trade and stuff, and for all of his faults, which are innumerable, Trump's kind of right about the trade thing, right? Yeah, free trade is better if there's a level playing field.
Correct.
But if the playing field is super skewed one way or the other, the person with the free trade perspective is going to get shafted. So. Yeah, I don't like the borders, and I don't think the welfare state argument is a good one, because the way the welfare, not so much direct welfare, but the like emergency services, and they use the roads and they use the schools. That stuff is consumption tax based. So if you come here illegally, you're still paying ostensibly for your share of that piece of it. Now, I don't like the way that's funded, but I'm like, we had a Sarcasm and Liberty conversation about what taxes would you like and not. And consumption taxes are kind of the better way to go, because at least you have some chance to opt out. You have some chance to work your way around them. And ostensibly, they're paying directly for the services that you're paying the taxes for, right? So like in Texas, the gas tax is supposed to pay for the roads. It's a little bit fuzzier than that, but technically that's what it's supposed to do. So great. You drive on the roads. If you're driving on the roads, you're getting gas. You're getting gas and you're using the roads. You're paying the gas tax. You're paying for the roads. I'm good with that. It's not the system I'd like to see, because I think private ownership of those things would be a more efficient system. But I'm less inclined to destroy that piece of it than I am, like, say, income tax or property taxes, where it's direct theft or extortion. And so, yeah, so with the welfare state argument for borders is garbage. They come here, they pay the same consumption tax as everybody else does. Even if they're renting, their landlord's paying the property taxes for the school system or whatever else they're funding through property taxes. They're paying the gas tax, they're paying state sales taxes. They might not be paying state income taxes if you live in a state with income taxes, which the high level places where like lots of illegal immigrants are, Texas and Arizona, don't have state income taxes. So that's not really an issue. We're funding stuff other ways. California, it's a bigger problem, and they have their own Communist Republic of California issues. I don't even want to talk about how to solve that, because it's such a mess.
Yeah, but a lot of those Californians are moving to Texas.
Oh yeah, trust me. I'm in Austin, like dead center.
Communism.
I'm in the process of planning a move. I will not be here in like a year. So that's part of it is they're moving here. And I mean, again, for all his faults, which are innumerable, Ted Cruz won by 2.5 points in a very red state, or what used to be a very red state. And everybody was shocked. And I go, y'all haven't lived here for the last 10 years. The state is changing rapidly.
There you go. So one more practical example. I bring this up because everybody who's kind of going down this road, and it's something we discussed before about medical research. And so I have a family member who works for the research division of the VA, and she's the cutting edge of MRIs, and like she was part of the. Well, I don't know if she was part of the team, but she knows the guy who reduced the HIV medication from like a plethora of pills to like one pill and stuff like that. And it's government funded, and she says, in the system that's existing now, the drug companies and the private system, there is no economic incentive for them to invent a cure for anything, because they want somebody hooked on a disease and they can give you a treatment to manage the symptoms rather than one pill, one thing, and it's gone. But she says in the research division of the VA, because every patient is basically a burden on their budget, they are incentivized to take these things and bring it to a cure, because they don't want to have people consistently on the VA system and stuff like that. So in your worldview, well, first of all, do you agree with that? And secondly, how would you address that in your worldview?
So
it's a tough one.
Well, it's complicated, but relatively simple. So the incentives are wrong, and the question is then why? And the answer is because, especially in the U.S., the medical system is so screwed up because of government intervention that you pull one thread and you unweave, like, it's such a just giant jumble of, oh, we had this law 100 years ago that counteracts this law from 20 years ago, and they don't play well together. So you've got all this mess of regulatory nonsense that makes it super complicated. The other piece, especially with the insurance companies, and they're the ones paying for, quote unquote, the medicine that's not a cure, right? If you had actual free market health insurance and actual free market medicine, you would get people paying what things were actually worth. If you've got people paying for things that are actually worth it, you don't get the insurance company going, oh yeah, you pay $400 a month and you're subsidized by all these other healthy people, and we'll just keep paying for your pills forever. That doesn't exist because they don't have the budget for it. Right? It's a free market. You're going to pay for. Eventually, you run out of other people's money. You don't get to subsidize everybody. So that fixes the incentive problem. That's really what it comes down to. A huge chunk of it is the incentives are so backwards with government subsidized medicine that you're right. That your relative is right. That the quote unquote free market, or what looks like private healthcare in the modern world that isn't actually private, is super screwed up. Now, if you have a government mandate like the VA does to fix things and you've got a fixed budget and you don't have outside, you can't go get new clients for the insurance company, right? For the VA.
Right.
So you only have so much money. Guess what that does? That fixes the incentive problem. That's exactly the point. If health insurance couldn't just go get new clients to subsidize the people that are sick to keep paying for the medicine forever, if that racket didn't exist, the incentives would be fixed. Well, that racket exists because of the government. That's the point. The insurance cabal that exists in the U.S. now exists because of government regulation. The insurance companies went to Washington and you can't sell policies across state line, and there's all these anti-competitive things across the board that don't make any sense, and it's all regulatory capture. So it's not the government per se that did it. It's corporatism, right? It's the insurance companies went to the state and said, hey, make these rules for us so that we can hold market share and hold all these people captive and then raise premiums over time. So yeah, we need you to continue to pay for your increased insurance. And one of the ways we do that is, oh, well, if you went and paid for this pill, it would be way more expensive for whatever reason, because you can't import it from Canada and you can't import it from Mexico and all these other things. So there's not a free market in healthcare. That's my argument. And if there was, the incentives would most likely not be so screwed up, and that would probably fix a lot of it. Meanwhile, in the moment, yeah, your relative's right. The market signals aren't right, and the incentive setup is completely screwed up, and there's no good we're going to get national health care in the US, right? We're going to get some level of Medicare for all. It's the insurance companies designed it that way. The ACA was designed to be so bad that eventually we were going to get Medicare for everybody, and then some level of private insurance would be allowed on top of that. So if you can afford it, you'll be able to get private insurance on top of the Medicare for everybody. But what that means is the private insurance companies are going to be able to dump all the dead weight off of their rolls onto Medicare. That was the idea. They had to sell it somehow. And the way you do that is, oh, yeah, we're going to do this ACA thing, and it's going to be way worse than what you had before, and you were pissed about what you had before. So the only answer is the government's going to step in and fix it, and it's going to be better than it is now, but it's not going to be ideal. And if you want really good treatment, you're still going to have to pay out of pocket. And so you're going to get a tiered kind of class system of insurance in the U.S., which is not great.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, we see those, we see the social healthcare systems out here in Europe. I'm in London, so we have single payer, which is a disaster. I much prefer. It's a dicey situation because it is in fact a forced mandate that everybody has to buy private insurance in places like Germany and Finland and Scandinavia and stuff like that. But at least it's their money, and they get to pick their doctor and they get to pick their hospital. And if they don't want to do the treatment, they can do that. Single payers, we don't have those choices, right? And so, yeah, I fully empathize with that. You didn't really address the drug companies though, in terms of their research, and they're only taking it so far.
So before government funding, like the research companies, they get public money, but then on top of that, they get patent protection,
even with
right?
Private money, their incentive is still, let's make a treatment rather than a cure.
Yes, sort of. In the patent protected market, yes, because they make a treatment and it's patented and you can't see the research, so you can't go in and go, oh, well, if we tweak this molecule, now there's a cure and their pill goes away. Right. So I don't believe in IP.
Right.
At all. Like, intellectual property is a fiction. It's not real. It's a state enforced monopoly. And so if you don't have monopoly forces, if you don't have a state-protected patent to protect that pill, now you're going to ask me, well, where's the incentive to develop new stuff? We'll get there. But the competition part of that fixes the, hey, there's a treatment and not a cure, right? Because the competitor is going to go, I'm going to stick it to you. Here's the cure. We'll put them out of business because they just spent a bunch of money putting out the patented treatment, but now there's not a patent anymore, and I'm going to go cure that disease instead, and now they're out of business because they spent all their money on the treatment. The piece where you go, okay, where's the incentive to do the research and development, right, without a patent? You go, look at all the over-the-counter medicines that not on patent that still exist, that still makes lots of money, they're very profitable, things like Claritin and Zyrtec and all sorts of stuff that was on patent originally, but is off patent, is way more profitable now that it's not, even though there's generic competitors. Like, if you go look at Tylenol on the grocery store shelf, Tylenol is like 60 to 70% more expensive than the generic. And they still sell exponentially more Tylenol than they do the generic. It's the same stuff. But branding and marketing works. In a competitive market, name recognition matters. And so, yeah, you got to do a better job. And yeah, it's dicey and it's not as cut and dry. And yeah, you might lose a ton of money. Welcome to the free market, like everybody else has to participate in. Oh, I went and made a new car up out of scratch. There's no patent protection for me on any of that stuff. Oh, I went and built a house and designed a house, and my architectural plans ended up online, and those are just gone. They're not protected. Everybody's got to compete. Yeah, so you got to protect your trade secrets appropriately, and you're responsible for that. We're not going to socialize your costs and failures. That's what's happening now in the modern system. Is we socialize their failures, so they get patent protection, meaning nobody else can come after the things that are successful, and that's quote unquote the incentive. But what happens is that means it's harder for other people to do things, and we socialize their failures because we're paying more for the patented things because they can fix the price until the patent runs out, because they're the only one with that drug.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, to recoup the costs. Just to be fair about the Tylenol and the generics, so like Viagra and other things, they did hold a patent for a season to recoup costs. And
that's the idea, right?
So would you say limited patents then?
I would. So this is back to the Overton window thing, right? If I'm going to hold my position over here and go, yeah, no patents, and we get to a place where it's like, yeah, you get 5 years to recoup your costs, I'm happier with that than I am with the system we have now. That's not what I want, but yeah, it's so. I don't. Again, it's push the button or don't push the button. I'm not going to push the button. I want to see us work our way towards a better system, a better future. But if you push that button, a lot of people are going to get hurt because we've spent the better part of 150 years getting from post-Civil War, through the Industrial Revolution, through the Progressive Era, through all of the headaches of the Cold War, and into the place. We spent 150 years putting all that together. To blow that all up tomorrow means a lot of people are going to get really hurt. And I'm well aware of that, and I'm not advocating for that.
Now, I've definitely touched on this one before, and it tends to be something that keeps coming up, and I'm starting to question whether or not I really would. So I want a different perspective on this. Welfare and private charities. Are people, given that there's no taxation, do you believe
in my world?
In this world, yeah. Given that there's no taxation in this new world, are people really going to be generous?
So you can look at the mutual aid societies and things of that nature pre-1900s in America, and that was how most things were handled. There weren't, there was no welfare. There was your family took care of you. You had multi-generational living. You lived close to your family so they could help you out. And then, you had a lot of charity. And I think a huge chunk of that's been undone with the dissolution of the church and kind of the church structures for all its faults. And, the dissolution of, and the addition of kind of Social Security and the welfare state and the reliance on the government to handle those things. It's hard to look back and go, wait, how did we do this before? Because there wasn't before. The welfare state didn't exist really until after the New Deal. So we're talking the 1930s. It hasn't even been 100 years. So how do people handle bad stuff happened? Really bad, worse stuff. Honestly, the modern world is pretty soft. Worse stuff happened. We are still here as a species. In fact, we're growing faster than ever. So there were other ways to do it, and the government didn't do those things.
Because, so then anarchism is not just a shift of basically the systems and the governments in place, but also has to be a shift of mindset, too, for people.
That's right. That's why I don't see full anarchy becoming a thing in my lifetime, right? It's a multi-generational cultural change to get to that place.
We're not going to be, ADHD with our smartphones to full-blown anarchism.
Maybe the ADHD, if you can put enough anarchism content out there, maybe we'll catch some people and work our way there. But look, the modern world is not designed, and that's part of why I'm not a crypto anarchist, right? I'm fond of the crypto anarchy crowd, but I think the devices and the technology are being used to, this is hyperbolic and it's artistically dramatic, but it's the Matrix, right? It's designed to plug us in, keep a hold of us, and make us happy little tax slaves, happy little tax cows on the tax farm.
Crypto anarchists, what are those?
Yeah, so the crypto anarchists believe that technology is the way to anarchy, that it is the tool with which to move yourself towards freedom. And I'm very sympathetic to their cause. The problem is you got to get most people to be a level of technologically literate that is not going to happen. Most people just don't care about programming and privacy and encryption. They don't care. And to get to to use technology to get to the place they want to go or that I want to go, you've got to have people give a crap about real encryption and real privacy on a technological level that most people are buying Alexas and Google Home devices and the Apple AirPod or HomePod or whatever it's called at ridiculous rates. And there's a case, I think it's in Arizona, some dude murdered some people, and the court is ordering that Amazon turn over any recordings from the Alexa device that was in the house because it might have been listening at the time of the murders. Because it's listening. So people have already, privacy is dead and gone for all intents and purposes because people have decided, we're done. We're good with trading our privacy for all of these technological conveniences. And Google Maps, they've proven Google tracks you everywhere all the time, even if you turn off location tracking. They're tracking you. You've traded Google in your pocket, tracking you everywhere you go for traffic reports and Google Maps. That's the trade everybody made. And by the way, I am giving up Google Maps because it's really convenient. So that's where I disappear from. Like I diverge a little bit from the crypto anarchists. Is like, yeah, I think they're right. You could do it that way. I don't think it's going to happen because I don't think you can get enough buy-in.
I mean, the only way it probably could have happened is like some, like you said, not in our generation, but some future where we form like an anarchist colony on Mars or something, or the moon.
Yeah, Ursula K. Le Guin's got a great book called "The Dispossessed." It's about a socialist society on the moon and what happens to Earth. It's really, really fantastic because they're like, it's socialism, quote unquote. It was written in the '60s. It's anarcho-socialism, like it's ancomism in the way that like Marx described the natural progression of communism is a stateless society. That was the thing she wrote about, was the society on the moon is the stateless communist society. It's dystopian, but it's a really great book. And yeah, that's how they did it. Is they managed, the ANCOM community managed to get to the moon first, and then they set up their deal, and it kind of works and kind of doesn't. So yeah, I think, I don't think crypto anarchy is bad per se, and I don't think they're wrong about much. I think they're going to have a hard time getting enough buy-in to make it functional, but it's a tool that anarchists like me and agorists and voluntarists and that whole crowd can use and take the work of the crypto anarchists and go, yeah, I'm going to apply that to my life to give myself more freedom. And so, for what that's worth, I'm happy. I'm, thankful for their work and whatnot. I just don't think it's not the end in and of itself. It's just another tool in the toolkit.
So I know you just mentioned anarchism and voluntarism. I know we talked a little bit about that before the stream. Because we had a conversation. Yeah, what is the difference between voluntarism and anarchism?
Mm-hmm.
Did you want to touch on that real quick? Or?
I mean, I don't see a difference other than a rhetorical difference and the softness of the word, right? Anarchy, for a lot of people, means kind of European, early 19th century bomb throwing, or worse, kind of the ANCOM European model of anarchy, where it's, no respect for property rights and squatters and all sorts of not great things that happen under the label of anarchy. And so there's a lot of people that don't want to use that phrase for whatever reason. And so they came up with this term like voluntarist and voluntarism, and it's just hard to say. Notice I just had to stutter over it a little bit. It's not easy. The other piece of it is I'm a contrarian, and I'm here to make a point about that. So I like the anarchist. I like that label. Because it makes people you guys are both basically nominally ANCAPs with minarchist tendencies, and you're looking at me going, what the hell is that radical dude, the black flag anarchist, what the hell? I'm like, y'all are pretty freaking radical, and you're looking at me like I'm a crazy person. So, and that's kind of the position I want. I kind of want that place to go, yeah, I want to move the conversation to a place that most people might be uncomfortable.
So you want to be a hipster then?
I live in Austin and have been here for almost 10 years. Yeah, I noticed the beard and the long hair and I have definitive hipster tendencies.
You're like, I was an ANCAP before it was cool. Now I'm just an anarchist. But no, I just, when I heard you say that whole voluntarism and anarchism, I guess the way I kind of thought of it is because voluntarism is just voluntary. So voluntarism would be, I guess, under anarchism because it's a attribute of it, voluntary.
Right. It could be a subset. The other piece that a lot of volunteers get is they get into pacifism and stuff too. So that might be a slight difference. Is I'm not a pacifist. I have my own kind of minor issues with not so much the non-aggression principle per se, but kind of its theoretical implications that most people kind of hold it to. But I'm not a pacifist by any means. Run up, get done up. I believe in defending yourself and your property. So I think there are some voluntarists that use voluntarism because anarchy has some level of violence attached to it, and they're pacifists and they don't like that. So that would be a place that I could see some people kind of separating.
I mean, what if people started identifying as anti-statists?
Well, I mean, yes, and there's some issues with being anti everything and not being for anything, right? Anarchism is not just anti-state. It's for freedom. I'm for the ultimate level of human freedom that we can achieve in my lifetime. It's not just, hey, I want the state to go away and I want the, interventionism to go. That's not it. That's not all of it. Yeah, that's a huge part of it because those are the big problems. Like Scott Horton likes to say that he's super anti-war and it's all he talks about because that's the biggest issue. And why wouldn't you talk about first things first? Great.
Right. The first time I guess I really was hearing a lot about anarchism. Actually, Brooke and I had the conversation about the protests on the inauguration day, and there were all the people, trashing the streets of DC, and people were saying, these are anarchists, and
well, they're ANCOMs.
yeah,
right,
and then
the Antifa black and red flag ANCOM crowd.
Right, and then he started sending me what was it, Jeffrey Tucker, Brooke?
Yeah,
Jeffrey Tucker.
He was like, "This is an anarchist." I'm like, "What?" And I started having these like random debates with people on like Facebook and such. Like those weren't real anarchists.
Yeah. So anarchism of all stripes, black and red, black and gold, black flag. But we've got a real issue with the no real Scotsman problem. Like, you're not an anarchist. I'm an anarchist. And it's really bad in the ANCAP crowd and the libertarian crowd. Like, it's really bad over there. Because the ANCOMs, like, if you're even remotely socialist, they're like, yeah, come join us. Like, we need more people because we want to go in the streets and we want to cause some, like, we want to tear some stuff up. And so they're a little bit less bad about, but they're bad about the anarchy part of it because they want to own that word. The ANCOMs and the ANCAPs and the, like, no. So that's why I'm really clear about specifying ANCOM, ANCAP, and no, I'm not either of those. I'm an anarchist because they want to fight about that stuff. And I'm like, no, if you believe in freedom, even if you don't see a way to get there, right? Even if you can't see a way to get there in our lifetime, if you believe that you own yourself and free people should be free, that's it. That's all it takes. I mean, it is religious in that perspective from the Christian sense of faith is all that matters. Now, I don't take anarchism solely on faith, right? I want to see examples of that in the real world. I want actual evidence. But all it takes to be able to call yourself an anarchist is to call yourself an anarchist. There is no true Scotsman not really an anarchist as far as I'm concerned. Like, if you say you're an anarchist and you're for freedom and you're supporting freedom for everybody, you're an anarchist. That's all that matters. Now, if you also want to be a pragmatic person and talk about politics and talk about how best to live in the society we live in now, that doesn't really cause me any problems. Right? Like, Dave Smith is a great example. He's an ANCAP, as he talks about, and he talks about politics endlessly because that's kind of his job. But he prefaces all of that with, in my ideal world, none of this would exist. We would not have to talk about this. It wouldn't happen. But it exists, so we're going to talk about it. And as long as you make that box around the conversation of, in my ideal world, this doesn't happen. Now let's go talk about these things. I'm good. That's all I need from anybody. And so, yeah, the ANCOMs, the ANCAPs, and the libertarians and the socialists and whoever want to play no true Scotsman. I love having those arguments on Twitter. It's fun to, like, be more communist than the communists and more capitalist than the ANCAPs. And it's fun to screw with them. But in real life, I don't need to have those. Like, if you want to claim you're an anarchist, as long as you're not for the state, I'm good.
Anarcho-centric with like your family and stuff at Christmas, it must be a real hoot.
So I don't have a huge relationship with my extended family. They live a long way away. My mom and her siblings are kind of whatever, and my dad's family is a long way away, and they're super liberal, but not like wildly politically active. And part of it is like, as an anarchist, I don't have a dog in the fight, so it's pretty easy for me to go like, yeah, I'm good with like these 5 things that your guy likes, and we can talk about how good those are, and we don't have to talk about how bad the other stuff is. So that's fine. My parents and my like immediate family are basically ANCAPs at this point. Like, they've found the discourse. That's kind of where they land. My dad kind of reluctantly so. He kind of wishes that wasn't the reality, but it's kind of reality. And so that part of it's relatively easy. Yeah, it's not all that complicated. Mostly because I would rather talk about other things. Like, I don't want to talk about politics because I think politics is a losing proposition and it's a function of the state. And so if we can talk about anything else whenever you want to, I'm much happier talking about other stuff.
Since you don't want to be, you don't, like you have critiques of both ANCAPs and ANCOMs. Wouldn't you just be like an anarcho-centrist?
So Jeremiah Harding has this term called anarcho-coalitionism. It's my banner on Twitter and on YouTube. So if you go look at my profiles, it's anarcho-coalitionism, and that's I like use those as my banners because I agree with him. The tagline is, apart we fail, together we win. Like, yeah, I want to be free to leave you alone. Like, I want to be left alone to leave you alone. But that doesn't mean if you need help, you shouldn't say something and I won't come help you. Because that's how you get to anarchism. Like, we have to be willing to do the things the state does without asking the state, which means we got to be willing to help each other and work together and build the things we want to see. So it's not so much anarcho-centrism as it is anarcho-coalitionism. So when the ANCOMs are right about, like, yeah, the major global corporations are horrid rent seekers, yeah, they are, and I'll support you on that. And the ANCAPs are correct that, like, the war complex and the Federal Reserve and all the loose monetary policy and all this crap, good. I'm happy to support you on all that stuff too. No problem. I mean, it's back to the Rothbardian question, right? Like, Rothbard is notorious for having, in the same decade, programs with both, like, I think the KKK at one point, but also like Maoist communists. Like, he was the granddaddy of let's form a coalition and try to get towards freedom, right? So, yeah, I mean, mostly I identify as a Rothbardian on a practical sense.
Yeah, he's a good source of information. I like a lot of his writing as well. I mean, you're looking at two people who went through the whole Mises. I can't remember what it was called, like the
Mises Institute or whatever. Yeah,
the online course and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, and what I like about the Mises Institute is they are trying to answer these practical questions about anarchy and why do we have the state and stuff like that. So I greatly respect that. But I mean, so who were the major influences in your life? So you already talked about Ron Paul, and through your dad, and you talk about Rothbard. Was there any at one point it just went off?
Yeah, it's funny. So I backed into kind of liberty and specifically anarchism, like, totally backwards. So I didn't come at it from the, like, kind of normal philosophical, like, I didn't read Spooner first, I didn't read Rothbard first, I didn't read Mises first. I read this guy, this crazy Australian named Bill Mollison. He founded this design science called permaculture, and it is agorism in action in a very practical sense. And the grad student that he had that helped him kind of co-write that program, a guy named David Holmgren, is an out-and-out anarchist. And so it's very anarchistic in its writings, and it's very kind of do your own thing. And so that's how I got there. I wandered into that path backwards. And then in the kind of permaculture world, there's kind of two camps. There's the there's kind of the freedom and liberty. I want to be left alone on my homestead to do what I want to do, and then I'll interact with you in ways that we both find mutually beneficial. And then there's kind of the socialist permaculture is communism, kind of nut jobs that exist in everything, right? Like, even the Libertarian Party now has a libertarian socialist wing. It's nuts. They're crazy people. And when you're a fringe group, you attract crazy people. It's kind of what happens. And so, fair enough. They can do whatever they want to do. But in that crowd, a huge part of it is like, yeah, they're libertarian minded. And so you start reading permaculture stuff, and you go to, like, permaculture talks and this, and you get you pull this string here and it leads you down towards Rothbard. You pull this string over here and it leads you over towards, this thing. And so eventually I got to, like, yeah, I'm listening to Tom Woods, and he's constantly talking about Rothbard and Mises. And so, yeah, I go read a little bit of that, and okay, that's good. And those guys, and so eventually, right, you develop the discourse that gets you to another place. But I didn't start there, and the way that I got there is so backwards compared to most people that it's most people look at me sideways like, what the hell are you talking about? Permaculture. It's like, yeah, man, it's like, cool farms and homesteading. Like, not Lockean homesteading, like practical homesteading. So.
And how old were you when that was taking place?
Oh, let's see what happened. I got out of the Air Force in 2007, and I like immediately got a job working for this family that owns a ranch out in Kerrville, and I got fired from there and had nothing. I was living on the ranch, had a company truck, company car insurance, the whole thing. So when I got fired, like that day, it was like, oh crap! I had to call my dad and have him come pick me up. It was that bad, and I went home and lived with them for a while. And in October of 2008, the market crashed, and I thought I was watching Black Friday 1929. Like, that's what I thought was happening. So I cashed out what little savings I had and went and bought a shotgun and a case of ammo, and went home. And my mom, I found this thing. It's still online. I think they're charging for it now. It's called The Crash Course by Chris Martinson. I think he's charging for it now, but it's a really good look on how our financial system actually works. The back half, I think it's like 15 videos. The back portion of them are a little like, he was like thinking the collapse was coming, and he's kind of a lefty, and it's a little not all the way correct. And then in that process, I found a book called, he was on a website and they were advertising a book called Alcohol Can Be a Gas by David Bloom. It's really fantastic. And on the back of that book, because I ordered it, because I'm a voracious reader, I ordered the book. It showed up on the back of the book. It said, oh, our website is www.permies.us, I think was the website. And that's where I found permaculture. And so this is like spring of 2009. I'm 21 and change. So it's 10 years ago.
We don't hear too many 21-year-olds that necessarily share that ideology.
Well, I'd enlisted right at 18 because I missed my slot for the Air Force Academy by like one position. The guy that ran my selection board for the Air Force Academy had also run my selection board for my Eagle Scout. So he knew who I was. And when I didn't get it, he called me and said, hey, you missed it by one slot because of this, this, and this. If you fix it and come back and reapply next year, you'll get it, because nobody else was even close. And man, I haven't thought about this in a long time. I don't talk about it much, but I thought I'd gotten a girl pregnant. I didn't. She broke up with me, and I just needed to get out of town. And I thought I was going to the Air Force Academy. I missed it, but like one guy in front of me took it. And if he'd gone to West Point instead, I would have gone to the Air Force Academy. But I didn't apply for West Point. I applied for the Air Force Academy and missed it. And so I enlisted. And so I grew up around retired E8s and E9s. I grew up in San Antonio. And my dad works for several large companies in San Antonio over time that have, as you might imagine, a large retired military presence in their staffing populations. And so I grew up around a bunch of retired E8s and E9s, so senior master sergeants and chief master sergeants in the Air Force, and then also a bunch of retired majors and lieutenant colonels and colonels. And I know a couple of two-star generals that were colonels when I knew them, that were like waiting to put on one-star general types. So I grew up around kind of the cream of the crop of military service, right? And I'd always wanted to fly fighter jets. And when I enlisted, you end up with kind of the dregs of military enlistment first. You don't get to E8, E9, the cream of the crop enlisted personnel immediately. That's 25 years down the road. And so you meet all these people and you go, oh, so all that propaganda that I'd heard that I didn't believe at the time about, yeah, this is a way for poor kids to get out of the neighborhood, and they're taking advantage of those poor kids, and they're going to be used up eventually. All that's true. And then you see it firsthand, and you're idealistic at 18, thinking you're going to be a fighter pilot. You've kind of bought a lot of the narrative that they used to sell that stuff. And even though you're pretty gung-ho about it, and you really want to go overseas and, like, excuse my French, you really want to go over there and fuck shit up, you get in there and you start looking around and you go, holy crap, this is not what I was told it was in any stretch of the imagination. It's not honorable, and it's not glorious at all. And it's really kind of sad. And then I got out after a year. I never got deployed. I never went overseas. I had a couple of buddies die. I've got a bunch of friends that are pretty messed up. And so at 21, I'd been out for a little over a year and was really angry. I'd really felt like my trust had been violated, is the best way to put that. That all of the patriotism and all of the forgotten country bullshit that I bought into as a younger kid, it was all garbage. It was all lies. And, I'm watching my friends give up the best years of their lives from 18 to 25 to 30 to, I've got friends that are still in, and it's done a lot of damage. And so at 21, I'm like a year out. I had a friend die, and I'm mad, like I'm angry, and looking for some sort of justification. And that was the same time Ron Paul was running for president, going, "Yeah, this is all garbage. It's all bull. You can be a right winger. You can believe in whatever and be anti-war." He was the first guy to really openly say that, and it gave me the relief valve, the access valve out to go, "Yeah, I'm out. I don't buy this crap. I'm done." So yeah, that's how you get there at 21.
It's interesting how I started to notice more and more how so many pretty much libertarians, or in your ANCAPs, or in your case even anarchists, a lot of them who are in the military. I mean, I don't think you're going to find too many libertarians coming out of the DMV, or
no, because the difference is, right. So the DMV, you're a bureaucrat. If you're a soldier and you have the mentality of, I'm going to do this thing for my community, and I think I'm serving, I'm doing the right thing, and then you figure out that you're not, all of a sudden you feel violated, right? The person who works at the DMV, it's just a job. It's just bureaucracy. It's the same job as any other job. They're just, they're an NPC basically, right? For all intents and purposes. And so as a soldier, you think you're doing another thing. And if you go through that process and then come out the other side of it as, "Oh, I'm really pissed off about this," then yeah, that's what happens. You have you get a perspective that you're never going to get as a regular bureaucrat.
Yeah, because we've got who are in the Air Force, Josh, who was in the Army. You've got Mike, who was a Marine. Even just veterans I come across in general, just the attitude they have tends to be very anti-establishment. As much as they're kind of like, some of them will still have, they've kind of resolved to just I was doing a job, but I'm not proud of it, kind of thing. But they still will kind of but we really gave them hell or whatever. Guys who were deployed and such. And but I tend to see a lot of American Legion, places like that, these veteran organizations, there's really more so seems to be a focus on what they did. There's not really much of a praise of the state.
Yeah, for sure. That's
they're not. They're not. They're saluting the flag. They're more saluting the ideals and the principles. You don't really say, we did a right thing or whatever. They're more so for each other. If that makes any sense. So you're seeing. I don't know if am I making sense on that?
Yeah. So, I mentioned earlier that Scott Horton likes to talk about anti-war first because it's the biggest issue. Well, if you're a vet, you've seen the worst part of government up close and personal. That's what and so if you've got any intellectual curiosity after that, and you start looking at why is this so bad, eventually you either become just super anti-war, and I know a couple of guys that became super anti-war lefties after getting out, or you become super anti-war the other direction, because you have to figure out how to justify what the state is doing in your name. That's the thing that goes off in your head. It's this. How could I have believed something so awful that was a good thing? And the answer is because the entire system is set up to get you to believe that. And so eventually, if you dig deep enough, you're going to figure out, yeah, you got lied to and you got used, and the system is designed to do that to you.
That's crazy.
It's.
I mean, down to the church, right? Like, part of the reason I left the church was, hey, Veterans Day, everybody stand up, salute the flag, and you know, and it's like, how do you justify killing people overseas and sending your sons and daughters to die in some godforsaken desert, and then wrap it in the flag and preach it from the pulpit? And it's a horrendous atrocity. And so if you grew up in that culture the way I did, and you bought all those lessons, and then you go and you enlist and you do the things you're supposed to do, and it all backfires on you, and it all looks like garbage from the inside, you go, what the heck? Like none of the veterans that I know want you to recognize the fact that they served. They don't want to be thanked for their service. They don't want to be, they don't want the free food on Veterans Day. They don't want any of that crap because they're not proud of it for the most part. They might be proud of the things they individually did and the fact that they survived, but they look at the service overall and they look at what's being done in their name and they go, I cannot believe I voluntarily signed up to do this horrendous thing. I don't want you to thank me. I'm not some hero. Me in particular, I didn't go overseas at all. Like, I signed up to do it. The risk was there. I managed to, I got out ahead of time. The unit I was supposed to go to after training, before I got medically discharged, the unit I was supposed to go to left for Afghanistan the week after I was supposed to get there. Like, I was supposed to get there, do a week's worth of training, and then leave for Afghanistan. So I signed up to do it. I thought I knew what I was doing. And then you get in there and you realize, oh no, this is not what you think it is.
I mean, Amos, didn't you almost sign up for some kind of military service?
I was on the track for the Air Force Academy as well. I had a officer that I had to sort of a liaison. All this, had to go through, House, my House representative and both senators' recommendations. Then that didn't go through, so I backtracked onto doing ROTC. That didn't work out. Then I went into ministry, Brooke.
And then you left that too.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, real quick, I just remember, as you were talking about that, you talked about, Eric, you talked about like how a lot of veterans don't want to be recognized. They don't want to really bring up that they served. Have you kept up at all with this? What's his name? Dan Crenshaw. He's a veteran who was elected into Congress. I forgot which. So basically, he became he wears an eye patch because he had an eye.
Okay, yeah. I didn't recognize the name. Now that you say the eye patch, yes.
Okay,
seen a little bit of that.
So there was a whole thing with Saturday Night Live. Pete Davidson said something, and then he actually went on recently to apologize, which I thought was pretty good. I thought it was cool. One thing he said in there, the whole never forget thing. What are your thoughts on that? He sort of said instead of saying thank you for your service, say never forget the people that sacrifice themselves. Never forget in general, just
so
kind of honoring the memory of those instead of saying thanking people for service, which has become kind of cliche.
So there's two parts. It depends on how you mean that, right? If it's never forget, make them saints and put them on pedestals, you're turning the thing that I would accuse the war state of being into the thing that I accuse. You're fully admitting the war state is a religion, and we have to make saints out of the fallen heroes so that we can send more young men and women to die in the name of the empire. It's madness. Now, if you're saying never forget and use it as a lesson so we don't do this stupid shit anymore, okay, I can kind of see that. I would rather people just forgot and we went home. But I get the point. So it depends on which way you mean it.
Yeah, because you do see the hero worship is definitely a bit of a problem. I mean, on one hand, these are, good, they are made into good guys, I think, as a matter of their training. but at what they but just my opinion. But what they do is the thing that really messes them up. I mean, you go through your training, you're disciplined and all this, and they become upstanding kind of guys. But then as soon as they pull that trigger and take out a few people, then it completely changes. And then it's they're and then I mean, like you said, none of them are really proud of what they do. I mean, yeah.
A lot of them are proud of what they're doing while they're doing it. They don't realize until after. Because when you're, I mean, it's like any other thing, right? When you're in it, and it's what you do all day, and it's what the people around you are doing all day, and you're being told from the outside and from your superiors that you're doing, you're doing the God of America's work. It's hard to realize how bad. There's not a whole lot of guys that are on active duty, like Danny Surgeon, who's like, yeah, this is garbage. We're doing terrible things at a ridiculous cost for what purpose? None. There's not a lot of guys like that. And even if they notice during, a lot of guys get stuck. They've got a family to support. They don't have marketable skill sets, and they don't see a way to leave the military easily. And so even though they realize, yeah, it's awful, and it should not be abolished, they're just going to treat it like a job until they get to 20 years and retire, or until their next enlistment's up and they're out regardless. I know a lot of guys like that just put their head down and got through their service, even though they knew what they were doing was awful.
Yeah, I was rewatching actually Punisher on Netflix, and I realized it's not just some comic book TV show, but it's actually really addresses a lot of the different types of people in military, the PTSD, and you kind of see like Frank Castle is kind of this weird character that is so into what he's done that he somehow knows he knows killing is wrong, but he's so used to doing it. It's like every person he kills, there's a struggle almost, and he's still.
So, especially in special forces, but in the infantry, just kind of in general, and like frontline combat troops, one of the major things they have to do is you have to be trained to think and believe that overwhelming violence is a justified response.
Right, and you see him like coming into conflict with that idea, like because he starts to realize he was killing wrong people, but then he's like killing all the right people to undo that, but still killing, and it's just like he's torn.
Yeah,
it's a vicious cycle that he's torn in, which I think adds more to the story than just the whole just the comic book aspect of it. And of course,
everything, right?
Right. And then of course you see in the show, you see the different kinds of veterans he comes across. Mm-hmm. The people who because you hear about like the different kinds of guys in the military. Why do they join the military? You have like patriotism, you have money issues, and then you have college and stuff, and then you have guys that literally want legally justifiable means to kill people. They want to actually do that. And you see him come across all these different people and how he can relate to a lot of them. He related to that one guy that was running sort of the VA support, the veterans support group, and he's like, he gets where he's coming from, but he doesn't quite agree. He sees the kid that wanted to kill everyone, doesn't quite agree. Spoiler alert for everyone, by the way, since I'm already doing this.
It's been out 3 years. Like, if you haven't watched it, tough.
Yeah, and so you see the different aspects he comes across. You come across, that best buddy of his who was a private contractor, and kind of sees where he's coming from. Kills freaking everybody.
Yeah, I mean it's the case for anarchism, right?
Well, I mean, in that case, what is the defense strategy? Like, how do you, as a community, protect the community? Is there a plan? Is it like the Switzerland model, where everybody's armed and everybody's just like a militia style? What would you say, just to kind of bring it all full circle?
So, I mean, that depends on the community, right? It depends on what you want to do.
as long as you privately fund it, as long as you're not putting guns to people's heads, like mob style extortion like we have now, I'm good with whatever you want to do. So if you think, yeah, a militia style, distributed network of responsive adults with weapons is the way to go, fine. If you want to go kind of the, Walter Block, insurance based private armies kind of thing, if you want to go that direction, that's fine too, as long as you're not abusing those things. I don't have a preference one way or the other. I do think the risk of the private insurance, private army things is that could go really badly.
Right.
Warlords and such.
Well, it's not even so much warlords; it's just warring factions for clients kind of thing. And it's
good for business.
Yeah, it could be ugly. I don't necessarily know that it would be, but I mean, you look at kind of the Pinkerton agency during the trust busting era in the late 1800s, and you go, that got pretty violent, and it was basically the company hiring private security to come in and break up unions and stuff. That got pretty ugly. So I don't know that the insurance model is the best way to go, but I think it could be functional. I like the Swiss model a lot. I think you should be armed. I think, everybody should be armed. I think you should go buy ammo tomorrow and again the next day and again the next day, and you should train regularly. So, I like that. But I also know that there's communities of people that aren't going to do that, and they still need to protect themselves somehow. And so, some level of community hired policing or defense forces or whatever, that's, up to you. I mean, yeah, it's, in my ideal world, you get to do whatever you want to do, and that's kind of how that works. And it's, the argument would be, oh, it's the Hobbesian, red and tooth and claw state of nature kind of thing. And on some levels, the answer is, yeah, you have freedom. That means you are responsible for defending yourself. It means you're responsible for yourself in general. And, what exactly that looks like is up to you. So I don't have a prescription necessarily for how to handle that. There are lots of people that have, theorized about different ways to do that. And I would like to see all of them tried at different points. That's really the thing that I want the market to be open to you want to, if Minneapolis wants to do the insurance thing and London wants to do the militia thing and Austin wants to do some weird combination of good. I want to see, marketplaces and the experimentation. So that's fine.
Awesome.
Well, anything you wanted to add, Brooke?
No, I just say, man, you've been a fantastic guest with this thing. I really appreciate you clarifying your positions and stuff. Would have been great if we had more time. I've got so many concepts, I could have bounced off you, but maybe some other time.
I'm happy to do it again.
Awesome.
Oh yeah, definitely got to bring him back at some point. But anything you wanted to just throw in at the very end here, Eric, about anarchism? Your last little
and how to get in touch with you.
It's the only way to be. Anarchy is the only way to be. It's the only way out. Everything else is some level of the dichotomy. Anarchy is the only way out. And you can get in touch with me on Twitter and theoretically on YouTube. I'm sure Amos will link to my Twitter. And
yeah.
I'm easy enough to find. It's my first initial and last name on Twitter. I'm not hiding. Come find me.
So, you could follow Eric here. Actually, I got it pulled up here at E Laprise, so ELAPRISE. He is on Twitter, and you can also check out the YouTube channel. I know you're still kind of getting started. You're kind of pulling clips and stuff from conversations you're having on other live streams, which is good.
Yeah, and then linking back to those live streams is kind of the idea. Right. Go find that one conversation.
So, but yeah, check out his stuff there. Check out Brook's Twitter at Brook_Potter, my Twitter at Amos Joe. Definitely for the listeners as well. Subscribe to my channel here. Look up Shitlord Preachers. You'll find me there. And subscribe to the podcast as well. Check out the other podcasts that Think Liberty has as well. This is once again our 31st episode for Shitlord Preachers. We will, of course, be back again next week on Monday at 11 o'clock. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. We will see you later.
Thanks, guys.